Atomic Heart released a couple of years ago at the time of recording this. And in case you missed the details, let me give you a little idea. It's the 50s or 60s. You're in an atom punk version of the USSR, and you have to deal with a rogue scientist and a robot takeover with the help of an overly sexual refrigerator and creatures of legend such as Baba Yaga and Domovoy. So if your house is a little messy, there's your reminder. You might be wondering, Feedwater, what's atom punk? What the fuck is a Baba Yaga? Don't worry, all these questions and more will be answered if you stick around. We start out as P3. We're a military investigator, and we're tasked to find out what exactly happened in Facility 3826. We have a sentient glove that talks to us and performs various different functions, which is actually pretty useful and comes into effect in the plot later on. If we go to the Atomic Heart page itself, it tells us all about it. So let's read into it a little. Atomic Heart features a large open world as well as numerous close-quarter compounds. Due to the nature of the world's design, players can choose to either confront enemies directly or engage in stealth. Combat consists of shooting and slashing with improvised weapons. A wide variety of enemies are featured. Each enemy is categorized as either organic or mechanical and have their own strengths and weaknesses which can be exploited. Players can craft and upgrade weapons, ammo, consumables, and abilities at a sentient vending machine, which I mentioned before, called NORA, which is located across the game world. Crafting can only be done if the necessary recipe and crafting materials have been found. The player has access to extraordinary abilities through the glove, which I just mentioned, which grants powers such as shock, telekinesis, frostbite, etc. These powers can enhance the capabilities of firearms and melee weapons. The player can also temporarily apply elemental effects to weapons through cartridges. Now, what I initially believed at first was that this was entirely an open world thing, but it's not. It's a little bit different. It doesn't hinder the gameplay in any way. In my experience, I had a fucking blast. It's just not. It's not that type of game specifically. Anyway, let's move on to the plot. Atomic Heart is set in an alternative 1955 during the height of the Soviet Union's power in the Cold War. The game takes place at Facility 3826, which we mentioned, the Soviet Union's foremost scientific research hub. In 1936, scientist Dmitry Sechenov developed a liquidized programmable module called the polymer, sparking massive technological breakthroughs in the field of energy and robotics in the USSR, freeing much of the populace from manual labor. When World War II broke out, the Soviets quickly gained the upper hand, but just before Nazi Germany was defeated in 1942, they unleashed the brown plague virus, leaving millions dead and creating an international demand for Soviet robots to compensate for the resulting worker shortage in Europe. As part of the Soviet Union's post-war reconstruction program, Sechenov created a wireless network artificial intelligence called Kollektiv 1.0 that linked his robots together for greater efficiency. As we go on, you'll hear more and more about Kollektiv. It's one of the major parts of the plot.
Major Nechayev reporting for duty on Comrade Sechenov's direct order.
Welcome, Comrade Major! Today is a joyful occasion! The birthday of Kollektiv!
Yeah, many happy returns. Cut to the chase, would you? I've got places to be.
Naturally! This is the future of Soviet education, a personal project of Dr. Sechenov's poly-education. Gone are the days when Soviet citizens had to spend years studying at educational institutions. From this moment on, just inject a special neuropolymer encoded with the education you want, a university-level natural sciences curriculum, for example, and you'll instantly become an educated member of society. Want to learn Korean, or get a doctorate in nuclear physics, or learn to play the piano? With Kollektiv 2.0, you can!
This time, the US and USSR entered the Cold War, and the US and many Western allies imposed sanctions on Soviet robots exported to curb unemployment, as the US and many countries in North and South America did not suffer from the brown plague. Most recently, Sechenov developed the Thought Neuroconnector, a device that integrates polymer into the human body and allows humans to remotely interface with robots. Thought is to be released alongside Kollektiv 2.0, and Sechenov boasts that it will usher in a true post-labor era for the entire world. However, Kollektiv 2.0's official launch goes awry, plunging Facility 3826 into chaos. The Thought Neuroconnector is how you communicate with your glove, by the way. Major Sergei Nikayev codenamed P3, is a World War II veteran with memory problems who befriended Dr. Sechenov after the latter saved his life. P3 is invited to Facility 3826 ostensibly to assist in the rollout of Kollektiv, but when he arrives, he finds that the facility's robots have become hostile and massacred most of the human personnel. Sechenov explains that Viktor Petrov, Kollektiv's 2.0 lead engineer, sabotaged the Kollektiv 1.0 node that managed the facility, and P3 is tasked with finding and apprehending Petrov. With his AI partner Charles, the Glove, P3 must confront homicidal robots and failed biomechanical experiments while dealing with his own ever-deteriorating mental disability. This ends up being a bigger part of the plot later on. P3 tracks down Petrov in one of the labs and finds out that he's working with neurosurgeon Dr. Larissa Filatova. Petrov flees and is apparently killed, with P3 only finding his headless corpse. Meanwhile, the Politburo grows suspicious about what is happening at the facility. Aforementioned Politburo being the policymaker of the Soviet Union. Sechenov had been covering up the true scale of the disaster. One of its members, Yegor Molotov, decides to partially inspect the facility and threatens to shut down Sechenov's atomic heart project. Charles explains to P3 that Sechenov and the Politburo are in a secret power struggle over who will ultimately control Kollektiv, and the Politburo will certainly use the incident as an excuse to get rid of Sechenov. Sechenov orders P3 to intercept Molotov, but once P3 makes contact with him, he suddenly blacks out and wakes up to find Molotov and his entire delegation murdered, with Sechenov informing P3 that robots killed them. Molotov's body was disposed of by the use of neuropolymer, a red variant of polymer that took the form of his body and absorbed it, leaving nothing but his skeleton and clothes. Sechenov then detects somebody trying to transmit a signal to America, leading him to believe Petrov is still alive because Filatova helped revive him. He orders P3 to continue his pursuit of Petrov. If P3 pursues him, he begins writing how Sechenov plans to kill millions of people and enslave the world with the activation of Kollektiv, which is why he's trying to sabotage the project by informing the US. He reveals to P3 that the rogue robots had a combat mode installed in them from the very beginning, which he merely activated. Victor then gives P3 a pair of rings and commits suicide, but Sechenov has him collect Petrov's head. When Sechenov asks about the rings, P3 lies about obtaining them, coming to the conclusion that Sechenov and the Politburo's atomic heart plan is to take down the US and their Western allies by distributing civilian robots with hidden combat modes to seize nuclear power plants and take down infrastructure from the inside, in preparation for a massive Soviet takeover once Kollektiv launches. P3 then takes Petrov's head to a lab where Sechenov's assistant Michael Stockhausen has a machine that can extract his memories, but Filatova destroys the machine with a grenade and the blast knocks P3 unconscious, and blew a batch of neuropolymer near Stockhausen, killing him. When P3 wakes up, he is contacted by Filatova, who asks to meet her in the lab. There, she shows him the human test subjects for Kollektiv, revealing that Kollektiv is actually a means to rob people of their free will and mind control them. Shocked at the revelation, P3 is convinced to work with her to find out the truth from Sechenov and threw the rings into the ocean. Delving deeper into the lab, P3 discovers that Charles isn't actually an AI, but the mind of Karaton Zakharev, Sechenov's friend and a fellow polymer researcher who was presumably murdered by him. Using Zakharev's security clearance, they head into the lab's archives to find out more about P3's past. There, P3 learns that in order to fix a serious brain injury, Sechenov installed a polymer implant in his brain, and also served to erase his memories of his deceased wife, Yekaterina Nechaeva, which Sechenov used her separated brain to create his robot bodyguards left and right. You know, the game's marketing appeal, as well as mind control P3 needed. Furious, P3 decides to go confront Sechenov. However, P3 blacks out again and wakes up in the care of Granny Zina, his mother-in-law, Baba Yaga. Which is fitting to say as she flies a rocket-propelled wooden hut in a pet that resembles a birdhouse with real chicken feet. The feet are one of the big things, right? Like a house that moves and shit. It's crazy. Anyway, at this point, Zina reveals that P3 killed Filatova while he's blacked out, enraging P3. At this point, P3 can either choose to give up or leave the facility, or continue with his plans to confront Sechenov. Okay. What about the endings? After learning of his past, P3 returns to Granny Zina, who he finds out is his mother-in-law from his marriage. This implies that she is at the facility because she knows that her daughter's mind was stolen and placed in the two robot ballerinas, but her goal there is never explored. When P3 meets with her, she gives him the choice of how to move forward, which determines the ending shown at the close of the game. The refused ending. Player chooses to leave the facility behind to try and live their life after rejecting Sechenov's designs and his role within them. They are given the bad ending. He destroys Charles and slips out of the facility and disappears, allowing Sechenov to continue his plans to activate Kollektiv, proceeding with the Soviet Union's plans and taking over the world. A cutscene plays saying that P3 was last seen walking through farm fields moving away from the research facility. The cutscene also references a strange chunk of polymer that was seen at the facility, but that goes unexplained unless the player chooses the option to get the canonical good ending. The canon ending. If the player instead chooses to have P3 accept Xena's help to go and face Sechenov once and for all, they are given the good ending, which is widely considered canonical. P3 is then taken to an armory of Granny Xena's where he is able to grab equipment and gear to prepare for the final showdown. Before reaching Sechenov, P3 has to face off against one of the Ballerina Twins. After defeating Left, P3 doesn't destroy the robot after figuring out that his wife could still be within. A gasp could be heard by Left before she escaped through the ceilings to the top floor. P3 then approaches Sechenov, which leads to the player being put through a challenging boss fight where the player has to fight both of the twins. P3 successfully defeats both of the twins, which leads to both of them being completely destroyed, freeing the consciousness of his wife from its imprisonment. Sechenov aims a gun at P3 in a last resort effort but is disarmed and mortally wounded by him. From there, Sechenov warns him that Charles has been manipulating him the whole time, which is true. Charles admits that he was the one who was causing P3 to be sent to Limbo and is responsible for Molotov and Filatova's deaths. While he'd been blacked out, Charles had been taking over. P3, outraged to figure out that Charles was responsible this whole time, attempts to rip out Charles from his glove, but is subdued by him with electrocution. After which, a small pile of goo emerges out of his glove, where Charles then transports his own consciousness into red polymer, which gives him a human form. Charles then explains that he believes polymer and its creations are the next dominant species of the world, and that with Kollektiv 2.0 he will be able to enslave humanity to shape his vision for the future. From there, he approaches Sechenov, who is currently bleeding out, and snaps his neck. From there, P3 is then sent to Limbo, where he is joined by one of the twins, which is assumed to be taking on the form of his wife. As for reviews, they received generally favorable ones for the PC version, while console versions received mixed or average reviews according to Metacritic. Considering the themes of the game and, interpretations, it's fair to say that it's taken a wide variety of ways. For example, as a political satire of authoritarianism, artificial intelligence, and communism, Ed Power of the Daily Telegraph wrote that, playing the game, the player will be left with no doubt as to the dark side of Soviet manifest destiny. The central conflict is between the Politburo and Sechenov. The implication is that the latter is a power-hungry madman who has poisoned the communist dream. Whatever Atomic Heart is, it isn't a love letter to the Soviet Union. This is a paradise lost, fatally undone by its Prometheus complex. Journalist Kevin Purdy of Ars Technica wrote that within the game, the USSR makes the world's best robots. Its citizens live in a utopia where those robots do their menial tasks and labor, and even greater things are just about to happen. A world full of astounding promises, yet take apart that optimism by showing the hypocrisy, the false promises, the ego-driven leaders and actors causing so much pain, and the impact on real people's lives when it all comes apart. The Soviet state and Atomic Heart and its maniacal leaders are responsible for the death of untold thousands or millions at the hands of their robots. There are plans to foist this death on the rest of the world rather than win them over with the benefits. The KGB, for which your protagonist formerly worked, are not the good guys. This is probably the review I'd agree with the most with. It's hard to say exactly what it is, but I wouldn't say it glorifies it. Anyway, Jason Faulkner of Game Revolution felt that while the game is frequently critical of the Soviet Union, it stopped short of ever outright condemning it. Renata Price of Vice News also wrote that the game depicts a scenario with the Soviet Union's quest for technology and expansion. There are numerous sarcastic references to conquering the stars. It's gone horribly, murderously wrong. All Atomic Heart a straight-up celebration of the Soviet Union would be a misrepresentation. Yeah, it would. But bearing all that in mind, the company still faced significant criticism. The Ukrainian Ministry of Digital Transformation critiqued Munfish, the studio behind the game, noting that the developers of the game did not come out with a public statement condemning the Putin regime and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, also pointing out that the game has Russian roots and romanticizes communist ideology in the Soviet Union. The February 21st release date drew criticism because it nearly coincided with the first-year anniversary of the war. Munfish stated that the company is neutral in world affairs and does not comment on politics or religion, and also added that the studio is undeniably a pro-peace organization against violence against people. I mean, they made a game, man. Not everything has to be a political statement, you know? Anyway, Munfish has also been accused of collecting data of users based in Russia and providing it to the Federal Security Service. The developer denied these allegations, stating, "Our game and website do not collect any information or data. The website's privacy statement is outdated and wrong and should have been removed years ago." In January 2023, the studio replaced the Russian language privacy policy on the website with English. IGN praised Atomic Heart for being deeply ambitious, highly imaginative, and consistently impressive, though it criticized its writing and tedious elements of gameplay such as fetch quests. PC Gamer called it one of the oddest AAA games. They felt it took primary influence from BioShock, but criticized its combat and progression system as inferior, while being conflicted towards the story and characters. Similarly, Polygon felt that Atomic Heart failed to eclipse BioShock through its gameplay and attempts to tackle multiple themes at once. Here's an interesting tidbit. In 2021 and 2023, Munfish's studio head officially confirmed the development of a sequel, so, well, hopefully soon here we will see a sequel, because, I mean, I did enjoy the game. It was a pretty unique game. You know, not many games have that take, you know, that theme, everything like that. It's pretty good commentary to me. You know, I don't want to get into politics and talk about, like, communism, for example, but I feel like it presented it pretty neutrally. Like, it said, oh, well, they tried to do all this fucked up shit, and guess what? Well, people took the brunt of it, you know, it backfired, right? Obviously. So I wouldn't say it's glorifying anything. Okay, it might be at the beginning, but it's still setting up the fucking game itself, you know what I mean? Like, you have to put shit in a perspective. There's the music too. They recycled a lot of Soviet soundtracks, by the way, and those are that's another topic entirely. The game in general has a really cool soundtrack. You start off, I don't know, going up in a fucking balloon and listening to "A Million Ali Rose" by Yaga, who actually has a couple more songs in the soundtrack. So if you know anything about popular Russian songs, well, chances are you probably know a couple of these. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but because the year of the game is set in 1955, they decided to go ahead and just get like the most iconic Soviet songs that maybe some people who played this game would remember from their youth, or, you know, from being around family members, whatever the case may be, right? Even, you know, maybe learning the language for a couple years, you know, having some exposure to it. Maybe you have a couple friends, you might recognize a few of these songs, right? Anyway, they explain it away in the game as the radio of the future, which calculates radio waves from the future and transfers them to speakers and not devices. And there are also a few remixes made exclusively for the game. To point out a few heavy hitters, they've got Komarova, Vyozny Leta, Travo Doma, and more. I see it. To me, I'm just not a fan of the remixes. I never really enjoy remixes unless the artist honestly knows what they're doing, but I can see what they're trying to go for here. They're going for that fucking retro futurism vibe, which I understand. I'm don't really like it, you know? To give you a little bit more information about it, you might recognize this name, Mick Gordon, also known for Doom, Prey, and Wolfenstein. Andrei Bugarov, and Joffrey Day, who did a lot of the remixes. So 3 people actually worked on the soundtrack for this game. It's had 3 separate DLCs so far. The most recent one, Enchantment Under the Sea, released last month, actually, in January 2025. So, well, I don't want to cover those. I did want to mention them. I've only played the base game, you know what I mean? I haven't went back and touched it. I don't even know what had DLC, to be honest with you. To circle back to reception, Atomic Heart sold above expectations, raising Munfish's revenue to an all-time high. 3 weeks after the game's launch, they announced that the game had been played by 5 million players. However, the game was also available on the Game Pass on Xbox, so yeah, it's hard to say who really plays from where, you know what I mean? Anyways, I was researching shit a little bit. Apparently, Munfish was trying to make a VR Soviet game, but they ended up making this instead. So I was trying to look into that theme and understand like what gives you this idea in the first place. Like what are you trying to do here? Like are you trying to hop on that Soviet like fucking space vibe? Like what are you trying to do? Like that retrofit like anyway, I found this article from GameRant.com. Atomic Heart, 6 real-world locations that inspired the game. And see, here we go, as the article says. Incredible world designs depict a future in which communism has succeeded, as well as presenting loud echoes of what led to its inevitable real-world collapse. It's a fucking game. How controversial can it get, you know what I mean? Anyway, let's continue. One of the Soviet Union's major operations was the construction and designation of so-called science cities or closed cities known as Nakagrads. Great artist, by the way. If you care, we were just talking about the space vibe. Soviet wave is an epic fucking genre. Not really ever talked about or heard. It's a pretty small genre, small niche, right? But Nakagrad is an artist. I don't think they've made anything recently. I believe it's a pair. Anyway, a primary example is the conversion of the formerly named Stalingrad into the modern-day Volgograd, which boasts a lengthy catalog of Soviet monuments, memorials, and megastructures. The first location players will see is the beautiful canal of Chilomi Complex, lined with trees on either side and an array of celebratory red flags, balloons, industry buildings, and nationalist monuments. There are a number of similar canals across the world. These man-made rivers were essential for rapidly expanding societies in the past, enabling the transport of resources throughout a country where there weren't always train lines and airports. In Russia, the most notorious canal is the Volga-Don. Built in 1949 by around 900,000 Gulag prisoners, it was ready for use just 4 years later, but cost the lives of over 25,000 workers. Author Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who worked on the canal as a Gulag inmate, claimed that following the death of Stalin, he sat and observed the canal for 6 hours, during which time only a single boat made use of it. Atomic Heart's canal is a reminder that these aquatic networks link the sheltered beauty of the inner city with the grueling labor and sacrifice of many generations. Sechenov's lobby was inspired by the Hall of Military Glory and Leipzig War Memorial. Sechenov's high-rise was inspired by the Seven Sisters, which were Stalin's skyscrapers built in Moscow between 1947 and 53. Call of the Motherland was inspired by the same thing, the Motherland Calls. It looks basically the exact same, right? And Facility 382 was inspired by Chernobyl. I'm not sure if there is a typo here, or, if this was intentional. But anyway, there you have it. Look, Game Rant's even saying, the chaos and disarray often associated with the collapse of the USSR is emphasized heavily, with many in-game preferences to state control of information, and an over-reliance on technology brought about by scientific arrogance. The transformation of an apparent utopia into a rapidly generating dystopia is a theme that links both the history of the real Soviet experiment with the premise and storyline of Atomic Heart. To end things off here, I would say personally, I'm just not really a fan of fan service in games. If they could have done less in that department, or just, I don't know, not have marketed it so heavily, I feel like I would have warmed up to it a little bit better, but hey, I get it. People, sex sells, right? But anyway, overall, the game's pretty cool. Like I said, not many, but like, what other fucking games do you know that are like that? I mean, I'm sure you could tie some themes together, but I would say it really is truly a unique game. And if we do get a sequel with Charles and, potentially P3 if he's not fucking dead, that'd be pretty cool, right?